Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. This is Side Stories. I'm Darian.
I'm Aaron. You said that so dramatically, too. It's like we're watching, like, Nightline or something. It was great.
I thought I'd, mix it up a little bit.
I love that. That was perfect.
Inject a little bit of flavor into our intro.
Good. We need some more flavor. Hopefully, like grape jelly flavored or something. I don't know.
Grape jelly's good.
It's solid. Well, anyways.
You know what else is good?
What?
Cannons.
Good job. Yes, cannons. That's
and
what we
segues.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Go off then.
Yeah, so as I hope all of you know, last week we talked about the origins of the first gun, and as promised, now this week we're going to be talking about the origins of the first cannon.
AKA bigger guns.
AKA, essentially, yeah, bigger guns. If we want to get right into it, we can... this is probably a good time to talk about the difference between a cannon and a gun.
What is the difference between a cannon and a gun, Darian?
Really not much. It kind of depends on how you want to define a cannon and a gun.
Oh, boy.
The best definition I found was any sort of projectile weapon that's typically of larger caliber than your average handgun or rifle.
Well, I think we're finding out that military engineers for almost a millennia now really have not been good of definitions or defining much of anything, but they've been really good at making stuff.
Which is probably the more important aspect. It's up to us scrubs to figure out how to define these things.
It's up to us nerds who have podcasts that we record in studios, and by that I mean basements.
It's our recording studio.
It's a recording basement.
And it's also where I eat.
Yeah, and sleep and do many things. But anyways, it's up to us nerds to just figure out what definitions are. It's up to the smarter nerds to blow things up.
Yeah, so going forward for this, imagine a cannon.
You know what a cannon is.
That's what we're going to be considered to be a cannon.
I always hate defaulting to the definition of you know it when you see it, but you know it when you see it. You know what it looks like.
Now, the cannons that we're going to be talking about, I guess maybe we should put a little bit of a disclaimer on this because it's not always going to be true. We're not going to be talking about like the traditional 19th century European cannons. These are going to be of various shapes and sizes.
Yeah, this isn't like your Napoleonics or the American Revolution or the American Civil War. We're not talking about those. This is what came before all that.
Yeah, and so cannons traditionally are used as artillery pieces. That's probably the biggest, or I guess you could say best way to distinguish cannons from guns is
Do we have a good definition of artillery?
Artillery is also relatively difficult to define because artillery has changed in function and utility throughout the years, or years throughout the millennia, really.
Technically, years counts in that.
Yeah.
Yes, that's true.
Because, I mean, in some sense, you could even consider, like, catapults and trebuchets to be artillery pieces, though typically when you think of artillery, you think of gunpowder fueled, or weapons that are projected using some sort of chemical reaction, not the mechanical processes of a trebuchet.
Yeah, it's basically moved from a physics, I guess, oriented weapon. Well, I mean, they're all physics based, but I guess you could say, again, like you said, mechanical to a more chemical reaction. Thermodynamic. There is the proper term. Thank you very much. And wait for the next 50 years. It's going to get more confusing. We have rail guns everywhere, so get ready for that.
And rail guns are cannons also. So, I mean, using like gunpowder as a standard for a cannon also isn't very useful.
Nothing is easy to define, it turns out.
But we're going to run with the half definitions that we've kind of concocted here.
We've been doing it for this entire series anyways. Let's just keep going.
And so, again, cannons, know it when you see it. That being said, the earliest known recorded depiction of what you might consider to be a cannon comes from the Sichuan province, China, and is dated to approximately 1128 AD.
All right.
And now, notice I said depiction. This is actually found in a Buddhist cave temple complex.
Not where I expected. Okay.
It's a very... I had a lot of trouble finding information about this particular depiction. There's really not a whole lot of information on the cave complex, but it's called the Dazu Cave Temple. And it's specifically Cave 149 is where this sculpture...
Implying there are at least 148 other caves.
Yes, it's a very large cave complex. It's Buddhist. It's religious in nature. I don't really know why this canon is depicted. Usually it's referred to as the Dazu Dazu bombard, sort of to distinguish it from cannons generally, also hand cannons, which are
as
weird.
we'll see, their own thing.
Yeah, but yeah, I had a hard time even just finding a picture of this. I had a hard time finding English language sources for
It's
a
one
lot of this
those
research.
annoying sources.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
But so the sculpture is actually of a horned demon.
Okay. This is not where I was looking this story to go. This is great. Keep going.
Yeah, it's rather diminutive. The demon is standing among other figures that look human. In the picture I found, I couldn't really see why he was considered to be a demon. I'm trusting that smarter people know that he's a demon. He just looked shorter and a little bit angrier than all the others.
Sounds like a demon to me.
And he was holding an object that's roughly shaped as a vase.
Okay.
And so, since it's just a picture, I'm going to do my best to describe it. Relative to the demon's size, it looked roughly the size of like an acoustic guitar.
Okay.
And my first reaction was it didn't really look like any sort of cannon I'd ever seen. It looked like the bag of winds from SpongeBob.
From the movie?
From the movie, yeah.
Well,
And I guess the one way you can know that it was a cannon was that there were flames coming out of what you call the muzzle.
okay.
And like this is the oldest depiction of any sort of cannon or possibly even firearm that we know of.
Interesting. This is a really fascinating story. No, well, now I need to figure out more about this cave. You set me off on a side quest here. I want to learn more about cannons, and I want to know more about this cave complex.
I don't know if there's, I mean, unless you're like a, what do they call them, a sinologist, or
like
someone who researches Chinese history, someone who researches Buddhist history. I don't know if it's necessarily that interesting. I know there's...
Well, I have a lot of random interest, Darian. I'll tell you that much.
I mean, if you want to check it out, check it out. I had a hard time finding anything on it, but...
Okay, well, before we get lost in the cave system here, let's get back to the cannons.
Yeah, so we have 1128, but this is just a depiction. We don't have an actual cannon from that time.
Okay.
And now, in determining what the oldest quote-unquote canon is, this is where it starts to get kind of gray, and it sort of depends on what your definition of, or what sort of level of evidence you want.
Mm-hmm.
There's sort of two, possibly three opportunities. I'm going to talk about two of them. The first, most definite cutoff for this is an actual canon that we know of and that we know was produced, that we have, is called the Xanadu gun.
Mm-hmm.
And this dates from 1298 AD.
Good year.
So, yes, probably was a good year.
Anyways, sorry. Keep going.
This is 170 years after the creation of the Dazu bombard depiction, and this was located in the ruins of the city of Xanadu, which was the summer capital of Kublai Khan, grandson and heir to Genghis Khan.
The founder of the Yuan dynasty in China.
Founder of the Yuan dynasty in China.
Which would be very important. A very important turning point in Chinese and, in effect, world history.
World history,
if you know
absolutely.
About that story.
So this gun is interesting because we know exactly when it was created because there's actually a date stamped onto the gun, and not just a date, there's actually also a serial number
Really?
Stamped onto the gun as well. Yeah, and so that would imply that this wasn't just some random prototype that someone concocted together. This was part of a at least semi-established, standardized production process.
Which is really fascinating to think about, that there was a whole method that was
Yeah.
already devised to create these things, I assume on a pretty large scale.
Oh, yeah, if it wasn't like totally standardized and wasn't being produced on a big scale, it was at least, there was at least some scale there, which essentially implies that this isn't the first cannon.
Do we know what number it was on any off chance?
I wasn't able to find that.
Darn, that could maybe give us some insight, because I mean, like if it was number like 5, doesn't tell us maybe too much. But if it was like number like say 2,000, it's like okay, they were making these in the thousands. Then.
Yeah,
It'd be interesting to find out. But yeah, little details like that are so easy to get lost in, even in the best of sources. That's the sad thing about researching such ancient history. Sometimes these things get lost.
and this was actually also a hand cannon.
Okay.
It was roughly 15 pounds and actually only 14 inches long.
Mm-hmm.
So it was quite small, and also had holes on its rear, which suggested that it may have actually been mounted.
Okay.
Or at least had the ability to be mounted.
So it could potentially be kind of like a swivel gun almost, maybe, or something like that, or at least put on like a stand or maybe a bipod.
Yeah, I wasn't able to find much about that. I don't know if it would have been stationary in a stand, but it wouldn't have had to have been held while it was being fired.
Mounted at some
if it was
sort of
mounted.
way, then.
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. I assume we probably aren't going to find any of like the actual stands or rods or whatever they use. Probably
Those
no
are
surviving.
Probably would.
Yeah, probably no surviving examples.
No.
Unfortunately.
And also, it's not totally certain how it was actually used, at least not typically, but there is some people who think that it actually may have been used more of like the fire lance that we were talking about in the previous episode than sort of like your typical cannon, which would be loaded with a ball or some other sort of projectile.
So it would be potentially like loaded with like rocks or something like that. Is that what you're meaning by that?
Yeah.
Okay, so just whatever. Oh, so, all right. So it's probably going to have more like a sort of shotgun or like canister shot effect.
Right. So it'd be more like a blunderbuss.
Okay, makes sense. Interesting. Yeah. That's pretty efficient, I suppose. Like, well, if we can't make specific shot for it, we can pick up rocks. There's always rocks lying around.
Always rocks.
Can always use a rock. Humans, at that point in our human stage of development, we had developed beyond throwing rocks at each other. Instead, we were shooting rocks at each other, which is
gunpowder.
A very important development in human history, I assure you. More important than you'll ever realize.
Yeah, so if you want to have an absolutely certain 100% without a doubt cannon to point to say this is at least the first cannon, you would probably pick the Xanadu gun. But it's not really a great choice because there are at least a handful of guns that we have found and have that are almost certainly older. Just sort of depends on how you define cannon. And the other cannons that we have aren't as well documented. They don't have the date and the serial numbers stamped onto them like the Xanadu gun has.
So it's sort of like they don't have the same level of documentation, for lack of a better term.
Right.
Okay, that makes sense.
And the best example of this would be the Wu Wei cannon.
What a great name.
And I'm going to preface this ahead of time. I apologize in advance if I call it the Huawei gun. I was doing it many times when I was doing research, and there's a difference in spelling and pronunciation, but it just sounds the same to me.
Well, we'll give it your best. You'll give it your best shot then.
Yeah. So
as long as you don't call it the Wawa, because we're not going down to Wawa.
No. So the Wu Wei gun is arguably the earliest cannon that we know of. This is dated to be somewhere between 1214 and 1227 AD during the West Jia dynasty. It's relatively basic and unassuming, except for the fact that it's also one of the largest cannons that we have from the 13th century.
How big is it?
It is 3.3 feet long and whopping 238 pounds.
Okay, so this was sizable.
This is starting to get to be starting to resemble an actual cannon in the sense that you would think of it.
You say it's over 200 pounds?
238.
I'm going to guess people aren't carrying that one.
No.
Yeah, this sounds like it's going to be mounted on something.
And I actually, just dawned on me now, I don't know if they found it in any sort of like mount or anything, or if they just found the
barrel.
The barrel, yeah.
Like the actual proper firing piece.
Which, the barrel itself is made of bronze, but it's actually not uniformly smelted, so it's different densities around, so which suggests that it's a very crude design. This isn't the highly organized, standardized style of the Xanadu gun. This is much more of a let's put something together and see what happens.
Yeah, this was either like an early development prototype sort of thing, or maybe it was like cheaply done or something.
Could be, and the details are possibly lost to history. Yeah. This cannon in particular, it was found in Wu Wei, the town of Wu Wei in Gansu province, China, actually in a cellar.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course it was.
And it was also found with a small amount of gunpowder loaded into it, as well as an iron ball.
Oh, wow, that's fat. So it was still loaded all this time.
Yeah, it was.
That's crazy.
It was approximately 100 grams of gunpowder and
okay, that's the size.
An iron ball, which was 3.5 inches in diameter.
0.5. That'll leave a mark.
Yeah, well, probably not right now because the muzzle itself is actually 4.7 inches.
Oh, yeah.
And historians think that the ball actually corroded over time, that it was probably much larger.
And it was more tightly packed in where like it should be, and it just became a lot smaller. I mean, I guess theoretically it should still fly, but you want that packed in more to get more velocity.
Yeah, if it's smaller, it's going to start to
bounce around the cannon. Yeah. I mean, that'd probably still not feel great, but yeah, it's not going to be that effective.
If it hit.
If it does. I wouldn't want to test it, though.
No,
That's still not going to feel good at all. And hey, I guess you got to give it props to how well developed it was in a sense that it never went off in that time. It's only supposed to go off when you want it to.
Which it has so far.
Exactly. It hasn't gone. It didn't go off by accident over that hundreds of years. So I guess you have to give them that. It didn't just randomly explode, which is good design in and of itself.
And so not all historians are totally on board.
Oh, shocking. They don't all agree.
Yeah, they don't all agree that the Wu Wei canon is the earliest canon. There are some historians, for reasons I really couldn't discern.
That's a riddle to the ages and of itself.
Yeah. They don't agree that this qualifies as a canon per se.
Mm-hmm.
But a big takeaway of all of this is historians do agree that the first canon was developed in China sometime in the 13th century, specifically anywhere as early as 1200 to as late as 1280. Mm-hmm. Once you get into the 1280s, you start to see reasonably well-produced, seemingly almost for the time mass-produced cannons that were being used in military engagements.
Okay.
So if you want a very conservative, definite starting point for the use of cannons, pick sometime in the 1280s.
Okay, so basically right before the dawn of the 1300s, which I think is when we start to see cannons kind of start to spread out of China and start to hit areas like the Middle East. Yep. And I think they eventually get to Europe kind of by the end of that century.
The Mongols actually had cannons with them when they attempted to invade Japan.
Oh, yeah. I guess it's lucky for the Japanese that storm hit, because boy, that would not have gone well.
Wouldn't have been
them.
good. Yeah.
No. Very lucky of them. But that's interesting. I actually didn't know that the Mongols had cannons that early. So I learn things on this podcast all the time, Darian. I love learning. Learning's cool.
Learning's fun.
It's like taking I get a knowledge cannonball right to the head every time I do this podcast. So I was trying not to force that metaphor too much, but I had to.
Yeah. I think. I mean, in the last episode, we talked a little bit about just how much guns have changed the course of history.
Completely changed the world. Yes.
And I guess as we've figured out, cannons aren't necessarily distinct from guns in any discernible way, but cannons themselves have also been a major game changer in history as well. Like the Ottoman conquest of Constantinople, they used some of the biggest guns in the pre-modern era. They were massive. I think they were like 3,500 pounds.
Yeah, just huge.
Napoleon was a giant amount of his success can be attributed to his expertise in artillery warfare. He was an artillery officer before he seized power,
yes,
and he was just brilliant when it came to artillery tactics. Artillery really changed the game in the American Civil War as well, especially once you start to see the Gatling gun, which is, I know, that wouldn't even really be a cannon or artillery.
No, that's almost like
a machine gun.
A rudimentary machine gun, again, because you're operating by a crank. But again, it's mounted on I believe it's a caisson is what the mounting for a cannon's called. So it's mounted like a cannon, but it's more like a bunch of smaller guns spinning together.
Yep.
Though there were spinning cannons later invented as well too. So yeah, that's the interesting thing about warfare and weaponry and firearms in general, is that once one development is relatively well accepted, usually other people will come in and add their own developments and attachments and little, new, I guess, frivolities or add-ons or however you want to define them, because some of these developments are really big and some are really small, because, again, you're going to get a rush of innovation with every other innovation. It's the interesting thing about, again, warfare and weaponry is that it's always basically daisy chaining off of itself to create more and more things. And that happens in other industries too, but weaponry seems to be one of the absolute best examples. I mean, walk into any gun store, you're going to find so many different little changes and variations on roughly the same thing, but it's all going to be different, have its own unique characteristics, but it's also going to be the same. It's so interesting to look at.
Everyone's just trying to get that little edge.
Yeah, trying to get the perfect
else.
niche to fill. They're trying to get like the best of the best, because there's a huge difference between a good weapon and a great weapon, or a good gun and a great gun, that sort of thing. It's a difference between, being a Colt 45 and all of the imitators that weren't as good. And that's the very interesting thing about, I guess, weaponry in general.
Yeah. Yeah, weaponry itself is fascinating because it's so like crucial to human history, probably for worse, but I mean, facts are what they are, and just weapons themselves have played such a pivotal role in shaping human history and where we're at now.
Again, for those of you who might not be as inclined to have an interest in guns, think about swords and how many different kinds of swords there are, or arrows and bows and arrows and all that sort of thing. There's so many different innovations on those weapons as well. And during their heyday, there were so many different kinds of, makes of swords and different models and all that sort of thing. And I mean, people even still now, there's still ceremonial swords and all that sorts of thing. And, there are people who learn how to smelt swords even now. And those have been relatively obsolete for a very long time. So with guns, which, are being sold by, the thousands or millions by the day, and they're all over the world, and people are fighting with them or using them for sport or other things. Yeah, it's just nuts to think about the levels of innovation we've seen throughout the entirety of this, arms industry. It's crazy.
Especially in the last, 1,000 years, I guess, with the history of guns, but also just the last 400 years.
Yeah, absolutely.
200 years.
Mm-hmm. Past 50, really.
Yeah.
I mean, it's been insane. But again, getting back to cannons, like you were saying, yeah, there is just this insane, rush of experimentation of these things.
Naval warfare as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have anything on that?
Utterly changed naval warfare because, prior to the adoption of the cannon in militaries, there was a little bit of very primitive naval warfare. Like the Greeks and the Romans had their biremes and triremes, which would literally just
run into each other.
Yeah. And that was basically just try to get as many shots off as you can before you board the other ship.
Yeah, or I guess, some cultures use it like, again, guys with bows and arrows. And it's like, okay, we got to get so close to them and we try to pick them off, or then we maybe try to board, or we just try to kill everyone on that boat.
But prior to the cannon, ships were transportation.
Yeah, for the most part.
They weren't really part of your military outside of your logistics.
Yeah, you wouldn't get something like the Spanish Armada without cannons, and then you have a huge, destructive, massive naval battle, that sort of thing. Like, sure, there were large naval engagements and there were pivotal naval battles, but to the scale and the level of destruction you could get with cannons versus without them, just completely different.
Siege warfare, too.
It did, yes.
All of a sudden made coastal cities slightly less defensible when they can be bombarded from the ocean.
Yeah, because, think about that, is that it's pretty hard to siege out a naval city with boats that you have to run into other boats. It's kind of hard to run a boat into a wall, so that's not going to go too well, because once you run the boat aground, good luck with that.
Yeah, you just wasted a massive asset.
Yeah, and now when you can, put a bunch of cannons on even a relatively, middling ship, now all of a sudden that's
got a pretty darn good ship.
You got a pretty good ship, and you got a very big threat in the area that you're probably not, on the side of the city that's probably not that well defended. So, yeah, think about that. It changes the way cities are developed, because you have to worry about sieges from the sea all of a sudden.
That's essentially why Constantinople fell. Their biggest trump card was their just massive, super high, super thick Theodosian walls that were around for literally like a millennium.
Yes,
at that point. But then the Ottomans came with their just massive cannons, like massive even for relatively modern standards. It wasn't until you started to get artillery on modern battleships that you saw cannons that were bigger.
Yeah, it's like railway guns and battleship batteries were comparable to the Ottoman cannons.
Yeah, they had these massive things that could just, it still took a lot of work. You still had to really wear down the wall because they're meters thick.
Yeah.
But the Theodosian wall still really didn't stand a chance to the Ottomans.
Well, the interesting thing about that is that the walls themselves, even when they were crumbling, they still had to fire into the rubble, and it was so well constructed, it was still, the rubble of the wall was still taking these massive shots and was still defending the city. So it took them so long. I think they had to basically go over the rubble. They couldn't pound it down into sand, basically. They had to get over it.
It's really weird to think just how much history could have changed without the Theodosian walls.
Oh, that city would have lasted a while, but it would
not the 1,000 years that it did.
It would have 500 would have been a pretty good run. That would have been pretty solid. But yeah, again, walls, cannons, these things are all military technology in a sense.
There's a reason why in Civ 5, once you get cannon technology, walls are immediately obsolete.
Well, it's dynamite, and it's the Great Wall is obsolete.
Oh.
Your regular walls and stuff still count. Because, okay, I don't want to explain the mechanics of Civ 5, but really quick, walls add defense to your city. The other ways to add defense to your city are armories and, like, military bases and all that.
Am I maybe thinking of Civ 4 then?
You might think of Civ 4.
I don't know. It's been a while since I played either.
Yeah, Civ 5 is only the Great Wall of China obsoletes of dynamite, which is funny because that's still around, and no one ever actually blew that up. So, who knows? Though it didn't really do that much defending even back in the day. So, it was really better for tourism. But anyways. Anyway, do we have any closing thoughts on cannons here? Anything else? We got pretty much through the first model of cannons that we wanted to talk about today, and then how cannons change the world. We've hit pretty much all the main points.
Yeah.
Any reference Civ like we always do?
I feel like we should do an episode on like early naval warfare at some point.
That would be cool. We haven't done many Navy episodes.
We really haven't.
We could do more boats.
And I find just naval culture in general to be really fascinating.
Just sailing in general is interesting. I guess we got a little of Isaac Sears. We got him because that man was a privateer. So that might be our first kind of foray into that. I guess we did a little bit of Caesar and Alexandria too.
A little bit.
There was some boats in there, but we should do that. So keep your eyes peeled. Later in this season, I guarantee you we'll have an episode that involves more boats. So I can't promise you what, but we'll find something.
We'll figure it out.
We'll figure something out.
You won't be disappointed.
The world's most obscure naval battle you've ever heard of that has a bunch of wacky antics and characters or something.
We'll talk about the modern Mongolian Navy.
Oh, that's a good story. That is a really good story. It has almost nothing to do with what we just talked about, but it's great. It's still a good episode. So
has boats and has Mongols in it. We talked about both of those.
That's true. We could do that as an episode, like a bonus episode later down the line. That'd be a good one. We'll have to remember that. So anyway, again, cannons. Don't blow yourselves up. Buy a cannon a day if you can, though, because I believe you can still own cannons in a lot of states. Because this is a fun fact I have. So the founding fathers of America. Say what you will about any of the things they did. I'm rather pro founding father myself. That's just my opinion because I don't have DNA of USA. I bleed red, white, and blue. Anyways, they firmly believe that you should be able to have cannons like underneath private ownership because if the government can have it, the people should too. So I firmly believe that all states in this union, given that that was the original intent, must allow people to own cannons. I will not be taking questions or differing opinions on this. This is my opinion.
But then the government has to figure out how to define a cannon.
Well, you know what? How about it? You know what? Just as long as it keeps its hands off my cannon, let's just worry about that. How about that, huh? That's my closing thought for the day. I'm on a list now, I'm sure.
Keep your grubby hands off my hand cannon.
Yeah, keep your... It's like the flag "Come and Take It," which really has the cannon on it. Yeah. If any of you recognize that from, it's one of the earlier... Is it the Texas Revolution that one's from?
I don't remember.
I apologize. I should know my vexillology history better. But there's a famous American flag. It's white, and then it has a black star, I believe, and a cannon, and it's in black text says "Come and Take It." And it's sometime in, I believe the Middle American history, because I believe that's after the Revolution, if I remember correctly. But that's one of our more early revolutionary flags. I apologize. I don't know every single flag that ever popped up in American history, but I just remember that one. So yes, come and take it. It's our cannon, not yours. Well, Darian, that it?
That's about it.
All right. Thanks for coming. Bye.
Bye.